My favorite show of all time is Daredevil. Did I see it when it released? No. I was actually in my last year of middle school when that came out, and I had no idea it existed. But it's held up beautifully over time and has a rewatch value like no other show I've seen. Now, after 5 years and one ended contract, Disney is bringing back Daredevil in 2024, and I'm as excited as I am nervous. In the last year, my optimism has improved with the actors cast and coming back, as well as information about what is and isn't canon and the tone Disney is going for. But I'm keeping myself grounded in knowing it could go terribly. I want to express my concern for why I think it could go that way, but mainly why Netflix's Marvel shows, even the bad ones, are better than the Disney Plus Marvel shows that they've released in recent years. Not only that, but why it's important Daredevil gets the justice it deserves. But let's look at a brief history first. Marvel TV was a division of Marvel that focused on live-action and animated television series. This was headed by Jeff Loeb from 2010 to 2019. It worked with networks like ABC and streaming services like Hulu, Freeform, and Netflix. Netflix didn't have many original series in 2013, and CEO of Disney Bob Iger said working with them was perfect for also growing the popularity of lesser-known Marvel characters, those being the Defenders and the Punisher. In 2019, Jeff Loeb left Marvel TV and it was folded into Marvel Studios where Kevin Feige would oversee Marvel projects. By the end of that year, Disney Plus was released. The reason for the Marvel shows being terminated by Netflix was because their licensing agreement with Disney was coming to an end, meaning all Disney content was being pulled over to Disney Plus. On top of that, and in short, because Netflix had to pay a fee to use those characters, their viewership was declining, and because if they continued making the Marvel shows, they would essentially be promoting for their competing streaming service. So former partners are now foes, and I want to compare the two's content ratings. Netflix and Disney both have a range of ratings from TVY, which is suited for all children, to R and TVMA, which is mature. They both include parental controls that include kids settings or blocking certain ratings. Where the difference lies in their Marvel shows is that Netflix's were all TVMA and Disney's are all TV-14. A mature rating isn't everything, but I'd be lying if it didn't enhance a story that needed it. If Hawkeye is going to introduce the Kingpin into the MCU, it better be in a mature way. But he isn't, because he's far too violent for a TV-14 show. Remember when he smashed a guy's head in a car door until it fell off? Let's have that same guy fumble around in a fedora while a girl a fifth of his size beats him in a fight. Violence and sexuality isn't everything, but the weight that actually seeing violence carries in a scene sets the tone and limits for what a character is willing to do. The Kingpin wouldn't be as intimidating if we only heard about what he's done, or it cut away before he did it. It isn't until we see it ourselves that we realize, oh shit, this guy is dangerous. They deserve mature ratings because, as people, they have never been a lesser one. They are rage-filled and vengeful because they're bad people and villains. I don't want to watch a clean fight, I want a real one. Out of the 7 live-action Disney Plus shows, 4 are about characters already introduced in the MCU movies. This goes against what Iger said about bringing forward lesser-known characters, which I think is their first mistake. Not to say I didn't enjoy them, I did finish them after all, but Marvel TV was about the lesser-knowns like Cloak and Dagger and Luke Cage, not doubling down on the big ones like Scarlet Witch and the Winter Soldier. Their second mistake, then, would be not giving these established characters all their attention. To use the Scarlet Witch in a show about her grief after Endgame is a great use of a character to expand on who she is and to showcase great filmmaking. To end that series in a Marvel-sized battle and setting up Agatha and White Vision for their own shows is kind of a slap in the face to that great storytelling. This is where the Netflix shows succeeded, not only because it didn't have the rights to expand beyond the characters they had, but because it kept the stories dialed in and allowed for a fleshed-out world. My biggest offender for why the Netflix shows are better than Disney Plus is the season lengths. The average number of episodes per season on Netflix was 12. Disney has an average of 6. 6. Half the amount of time to build characters, stories, arcs, and relationships. And on Disney, these aspects of filmmaking fall flat to me. Of course, there's a difference in attention where Disney has a schedule to introduce characters for bigger projects. Netflix has the time and effort to give for individual characters. I've broken down just how much time and effort they had to give in this chart. In 2015 and 2016, they released 2 shows a year. In 2017, they released 3 shows. In 2018, 4 shows, and 2 again in 2019. 2017 bred a couple shows that people didn't like, but The Punisher seemed to fare well. So, clearly Netflix's strong suit, and really anyone's, is giving the proper time to a show and releasing 1 or 2 per year. I think that has to do with Daredevil's success because its first 2 seasons only had 1 other show released in the same year, and the same can be said for Jessica Jones. The time between each season for one of those shows at the minimum was 1 year and at the most 3. That doesn't mean they were working on it for 3 years, but even 1 year is a good amount of time to make sure it comes out the way you want it. Iron Fist probably didn't do well because its first season came out in the same year as 2 other shows. What's interesting is that in a 2016 interview with Netflix's chief content officer, he said the budgets were huge and that pre- and post-production took a long time, so having character crossovers was difficult to manage production-wise. He said, "It's not the goal to put out more than 1 or 2 out a year, meaning shows," but that was in 2016. In 2021, Disney released 5 shows, all coming out 2 to 3 months of each other. In 2022, they released 3 shows 2 to 3 months of each other as well. How do you think that fares for storytelling? You could argue the length of the seasons allows for more shows to be released, but like I said, is that really enough to tell a compelling story? Okay, so what kind of storytelling? Well, like I mentioned with WandaVision, they have the ability to tell a self-contained story that is compelling on its own and that people really seem to like. But all of a sudden, there's this larger-than-life Marvel CGI battle that makes you go, huh? It removes you from what you just watched. They Marvelify it. On the other side of this, Loki created an atmosphere that felt tied to the MCU while giving him his own show to grow as a person. It's focused on his journey all the way through, and while The One Who Remains is meant to set up the next villain of the MCU, it doesn't feel in your face, what the fuck, where did this come from? It's a part of the story as this man behind the curtain that they've been leading up to. Agatha was there all season, but she didn't curse a small town and force them to play pretend. All of a sudden she was the villain when it was Wanda herself the whole time. Speaking of characters setting up the grander MCU, it feels like most of the Disney shows serve to do just that. In WandaVision, it was Agatha and White Vision. In Loki, it was Kang in the multiverse. Falcon and the Winter Soldier set up the Thunderbolts. Hawkeye set up Echo. Miss Marvel is in the Marvels. I'd say the only 2 shows that were nearly completely self-contained were She-Hulk and Moon Knight. And for new characters introduced to general audiences, that's pretty good. It would feel very forced to introduce a new character and have them show up for the first time again in a big project, almost as if they were introduced just to be in said project. But that seems like a scheduling issue more than a deliberate act. Listen, it's not all bad, it's kind of Marvel's thing to set up the next thing, but even with established characters, it can seriously undercut the main plot. Oh, so Bucky healing his trauma of being used as a weapon is a B-plot? Even though his name is in the title of the show and should be focused on more? Sam taking on the mantle of the new Captain America as a black man in America is being rivaled by an eventual Thunderbolt who thinks he can do it better? It's not that bad actually, but still. The point of bringing lesser-known characters to the small screen in 2013 was to focus on them wholly so general audiences can learn about them. Even if they were to continue using established characters, they should get the same treatment. I mean, do I really know Moon Knight? In a way. Could I know so much more? Absolutely. You know what would help with that? 6 more episodes and a mature rating. From what I know about him, TV-14 isn't cutting it. The other issue I have with Marvel is the use of comedy. On Netflix, sure, there were comedic moments, but they fit the mood and the scene and didn't feel out of place or out of character. The MCU has a big problem with letting a serious moment remain. I don't mind a joke here and there, not every character is going to react the same, but when everything is a joke, it really undermines the seriousness of the moment. I think Moon Knight did a good job dedicating an episode to his trauma and his relationship with himself, but that is a heavy topic for a 6-episode show. It deserved more attention than the 49 minutes it was given, considering it's a huge part of what makes him him. I know I'm biased because I love the grittiness and tone of the Netflix shows, but I find it an interesting choice to make Stephen Grant the comedic relief character about a man with dissociative identity disorder because his mother abused him and constantly blamed him for getting his brother killed by accident. Me personally, I would have given that story to Netflix. So how do the streaming services compare? I'm not going to go one by one through every show because that would take a long time and also I don't want to. But I will compare how the streaming services handled their storytelling and why Netflix tends to do a better job at illustrating who the characters are and why we care. It seems like Marvel started off with a bang in their MCU shows like WandaVision, Loki, and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But as time went on, the quality of the shows seemed to go down as well as the reason for why they were telling them. The observation I noticed being the biggest difference is that on Disney, things happen to characters, where on Netflix, characters make things happen. For instance, in Hawkeye, Clint Barton is along for the ride for what happens to him. He is the main character, his name is in the title of the show, It is about him, isn't it? He acts as more of a mentor for Kate Bishop, and his relationship with Black Widow is the bridge between him and Yelena. His missions are Kate's, and he's just there to encourage her as he basically retires in front of her eyes. He quite literally is having things happen to him, and that's the whole plot. In Season 1 of Jessica Jones, her kidnapper and abuser comes back looking for her, and when faced with this fact, she has two options: run or fight. She chooses to run at first, but upon hearing he has another young girl in his grasp, she decides to stay and help her and take him down in the process. She drives the plot forward with her actions. She makes things happen. And that's another difference between these shows, is that Netflix drops you in the middle of the story and then gives backstory later. So far, Disney has spent its time showing that backstory first and then going forward in time. On Netflix, we are watching real people make real decisions and living real lives. On Disney, everyone's lives stop to pursue a superhero one. It's unrealistic and reads as very Marvel-like that they would drop everything to become an Avenger. In Moon Knight, She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, they are all thrusted into the world of superheroes by discovery or circumstance. These are all new characters that need proper introduction for general audiences like myself, who haven't heard, let alone know anything about some of these characters. Netflix didn't use whole seasons to chronic how Matt Murdock became Daredevil, and then seasons 2 and 3 see his first 2 years as Daredevil. That would be boring. And as a lesser-known Marvel character, not doing it that way did not cause the show any grievances in showing who this person is and how his world works. Showing Jennifer Walters as a lawyer, then getting the powers of the Hulk, spending weeks on an island training as the Hulk, and then wrestling whether or not she wants to use her powers while balancing her love life in that order, isn't very interesting. If they had just started with that last part, it would have automatically shortened the setup for why she is She-Hulk and gotten to the heart of her character and her dilemmas. They could have used the fourth wall breaks to introduce backstory to supplement the plot, showing us how she got her powers and giving room for other plot points. To be fair, they did do this a little bit, but I still would have liked to see her every day intercut with background information. I understand that Marvel and Disney have a schedule to keep to, and not every show can be used as a character study, but it's a shame it can't be. I feel like these new shows are all stepping stones for the movies and need to include larger-than-life fight scenes with every line of dialogue pertaining to the MCU, or people won't care. Trust me, we will. That's the beauty of the Netflix shows. The Avengers are referenced but never named. Mainly because they didn't have the rights to, but they're better for it. They focused on the characters in the shows, their struggles, their conflicts, their morals, their antagonists, which were oftentimes the protagonist. And that's okay because it makes them more interesting and human to watch as they overcome those internal conflicts while physically fighting external ones. What bothers me about the MCU shows is that lack of love for the main character, and when that falls short, so does the love for the secondary characters. On Netflix, not only do the main characters get main story plots, but the side characters do too, and often intertwine with the main plot. It broadens the world beyond the main character and adds more depth and life to it. Even if a plot isn't directly related, it probably provided insight on a character, and that helps us understand them in some way. Oftentimes there are 3 or more plots happening in an episode, and the way they're balanced to continue a coherent story is amazing. When Karen Page or Trish Walker investigate things on their own to try to help the main character, their actions often get them caught up in something they can't handle or weren't prepared for. They circle back to the main plot, but simultaneously put the spotlight on them and build their character as not just the main character's friend or love interest, but as independent and critical thinking women. We also need these people to ground us in the reality of the non-superhero perspective. When the Hulk shows up in She-Hulk, he's kind of a cameo and an unnecessary mentor since Jennifer masters everything he's trying to teach her right away. I hardly know anything about her co-workers and friends because the seasons are too short to give them any time. Which is fine, I actually think She-Hulk works in this way as a sitcom, but for shows like Moon Knight and Miss Marvel where they're given the same treatment but have differing stories from where it does work, it leaves me wanting more. The secondary characters feel like helpers to push the main character higher up in importance. I know I've spent a lot of time shitting all over the MCU shows, but I want to say that they weren't all as bad as I'm making them out to be. Their new characters did a good enough job introducing who they are and creating an entertaining story. I like Moon Knight's chemistry with himself and Khonshu. I think the humor Marvel interjects in everything has finally found a show that fits its style in She-Hulk. It was fun watching Kamala Khan nerd out over superheroes only to become one herself, because she and the actress who plays her are like us as the audience. But honestly, these shows, and even the ones about established characters, are forgettable. They aren't compelling enough to stick around in my mind for longer than a week after watching them. and that's due to the comparisons I've made here. It's just another MCU project. Part of that MCU project is the look of it too. The problem with Marvel shows today is that they feel like Marvel shows. Audiences can understand that Ms. Marvel is part of the MCU without it looking like the MCU, and part of that is the use of CGI. Look at the difference between these two shows. Netflix used lighting and colors that are appealing and natural to the scene and look beautiful even in daylight. The CGI used for Disney looks CGI. Netflix looks cinematic, Disney is overcorrecting. They aren't all bad, and it's not all the CGI department's fault, it's Marvel's fault for throwing so many projects at them. I'm excited to see a new side of Daredevil from what was portrayed in the Netflix show. It focused more on his vigilantism, but it's sounding like in the Disney Plus revival, he'll be in the courtroom more, or at least more than in the Netflix show. I think it's a good idea to take this approach and give more time to that part of his life since it does make up about half of it. As much as the Netflix show is loved, I think change is good and that Disney is making the right decision to go a lighter route for sake of tonal variety. Not every comic run reads the same, so it works. But it also doesn't work if they claim he's the same character and most of his screen time is canon. Netflix's shows were moody and dark, and bringing that same character into the colorful world of the MCU is going to show unseen sides to his character that I really hope remain in character. From what we've seen of Charlie Cox in She-Hulk, I have no doubt he'll kill the execution and balance these tones perfectly. But it's actually sounding like Disney may give him a higher rating than they're used to, with the rumors of having a mature rating. If the Punisher is going to return, there's a good chance this is the case since the actor Jon Bernthal is only interested in coming back if it is as violent as it was with Netflix. While this sounds like good news to me and anyone who liked that maturity, it's another obstacle for Disney to deliberately adapt to that style of content, which may hinder other aspects. Already, Daredevil feels different from other MCU shows because it diverges from the formula they've used so far. I also think the success of the Netflix version carries a lot of weight to get it right a second time. This is also the first character to get their own show when they've already had their own show in the past. Marvel Studios has a template in previous episodes to draw on if they want to remain faithful to the Netflix version while adapting it to his MCU debut. The 2024 Daredevil is getting 18 episodes in his first season, which is 3 times the average so far. Although it sounds like it will be split into 2 parts, I'll take it. What we know about the plot so far is that Fisk is running for mayor, so in terms of MARVELFICATION, it sounds like they are focusing on the world of Daredevil and not setting up outside characters in bigger projects or ones that don't make sense. I'd love to see Echo if her show leaves room for their interaction again. Luckily, Daredevil doesn't have any powers that require CGI or VFX, but I'm sure that won't stop them from not so subtly sneaking some in there. Just don't make it look like the 2003 one where he's defying gravity and shit. The reason I and many others love the Netflix version of Daredevil is because of its focused, real-world, gritty, dark tone and fantastic writing. It feels grounded in reality while also suspending belief in his powers as a superhero. He's easy to relate to despite his totally unrelatable circumstances. When Matt Murdock has to choose between his professional life and his superhero life, it feels like life or death. We spent so much time with him we understand why he's making the decisions to potentially ruin his day job. Or when Jessica Jones has to play to the cameras and use her abilities despite her strong resentment to be a hero. She does it anyway because deep down she's a good person and knows she can help. These conflicts aren't given one episode to demonstrate character morals, they are ongoing conflicts of entire seasons and of entire shows themselves. Most of all, the reason it's so important that Daredevil and any characters from Netflix they bring back lives up to what they were is because they were written so well. If the Netflix shows are to remain mostly canon, that depth and history should be sprinkled in and remain motivation for their characters. The MCU has a weird history with keeping core traits in certain characters that at this point seem nothing like they once were. It's okay if they want to make Daredevil a little less intense and serious, but don't use that as an excuse to make him bland and unclever while keeping the name. Matt Murdock isn't Daredevil if he doesn't struggle with his religious upbringing and his actions as an adult. Jessica Jones isn't Jessica Jones if she doesn't drink away her trauma while using that to find a way to do good for others. The Punisher doesn't kill just to kill, he has the ghosts of his family reminding him of why they're gone. And on top of this, the violence that ensues is essential to the draw and gravity of their stories. These aren't things to jam in one episode as a reminder and then move on. It's the foundation of who these heroes and villains are. It's their motivation for everything they do, and the Netflix shows did not let you forget that. It's an ongoing battle that dictates every decision, not just a faint memory. They are weighty topics that lead to weighty TV, and while it isn't always so grim, you can't pick and choose the aspects of what makes someone whole in favor of general audiences. Based on Disney Plus's storytelling, that is why Daredevil deserves justice.